Hey guys, how's it going? B-Dog here. So today I am going to be giving you 6 tips to get better at Survivor and Dead by Daylight. Now these 6 tips are going to help everyone, especially if you are brand new to the game or you're having a bit of a hard time in your Survivor games. For these 6 Survivor tips, I'm going to show you examples of what I'm talking about and what I'm doing, just to kind of explain what I'm doing throughout all of these tips. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into our 6 tips. Alright, so the first Survivor tip that we are going to cover is stop running. Now, what I mean by this is don't run and leave scratch marks. This does take some practice to learn and just to kind of get into the habit of doing it, but it will help you stop getting into unnecessary chases and potentially giving the killer a hook. Now, let's go into an in-game example and show you what I am doing and why I am doing it. Let's look at this clip right here. We are doing a gin and one of our teammates is hooked and Billy is coming our way. We know this obviously because we are looking right at him. So I decide to crouch and tuck away off into the corner here. Jake unfortunately comes running in and gets downed. But because Billy doesn't know I'm hiding, I am able to get the gin done, and Jake is going to the hook. Another thing that was important in this clip was right after Jake was hooked, I hid again and didn't run, because even if I had ran for a split second, I would have left fresh scratch marks just lingering around, and then I wouldn't have been able to, get the generator done and get Jake off the hook. So that is one reason why you shouldn't run, because if I would have left the scratch marks, that whole play would have never happened, and I probably would have went ahead and went down. But let's go to another example. Now in this example, we are walking to the gin up top, and Bill blows the gin and starts running. Now I start to move closer to the generator, and Spine Chill goes off, and I know it's time to hide. The Huntress is right next to us. We go and crouch right next to the locker. Most low-rank survivors, even with Spine Chill, will run just a little bit, and scratch marks will let the killer know where they are. Always keep in mind that even if you miss a skill check, never panic and just remain calm. I know it's easier said than done, which, it's going to require some practice and repetition, but if you are able to remain calm and all that, if you can just sneak away and leave no scratch marks, it's going to help you out tremendously, and it's going to be much harder for the killer to find you. The other thing I want to point out in this clip is that the killer really didn't look around much, or just even really check the general area other than the generator. So if this ever happens, and the killer is really not observant, there's even more of a reason not to run, because you know that the killer's not going to be looking around for you much unless you're just out there in the open. But let's go ahead and go to our second tip. Alright, so moving on to tip number 2, we are going to cover when you should save someone and when you should not save someone off the hook. This sounds quite simple, but it does take a little bit of practice, but it will get easier the more you think about it. So let's go look at our first example. One of our teammates gets hooked and we are going to get them, and luckily Dark Sense goes off and I see the killer just in time. One quick side note, if I had ran at all, I wouldn't have been able to get the survivor, and this play wouldn't have happened, and more than likely I probably would have been in a chase. Now back to the original point, I was able to sneak past the killer and get a clean unhook, as the killer was going back to the generator that was completed, probably looking for survivors. But let's go to another example real quick. As you can see in this clip, we are the one hooked. The killer goes away looking for more survivors. Claudette gets me when the killer is busy, which is the right move there. Then we start to heal one another, and unfortunately we miss a skill check and our position is given away. But the point being is that this was a very good unhook. Neither the rescuer or the hooked survivor, which in this case was me, was put into any danger because of the unhooked. Now let's go ahead and cover some examples of a bad unhook. Our first example here is we are trying to escape, and the killer comes and finds our teammate that is with us and is chasing her and then eventually downs her. But she is hooked pretty close to me and I get the door open. Now normally this would be a great situation to get a survivor that is on the hook, because the killer doesn't have NOED and she's pretty close and we have borrowed time, but we are also injured and we can't get the save. We would just be giving the killer a free kill, so it's really not going to help anyone at all except for the killer. In this other example that I'm going to cover, I actually make a pretty bad mistake and actually get my teammate killed, so let's go ahead and go to that example. This is a prime reason why you just don't unhook someone, because you are right next to them. So this killer was very defensive the whole game and really did not leave hooked survivors at all most of the game. So as you can see, I am hiding and waiting to rescue, and for whatever reason I decide to make my move. I run right into the killer and she hits me and I unhook Jake. Then she gets the hit on him and I have just given her a free kill because I decided to run in there while she was standing right there. A general rule of thumb, if you are brand new to the game, make sure that the killer is gone and away from the hook survivor, just to make sure that they're busy and you know that you're going to get the good unhook. Or another good rule of thumb is to wait until the killer's tear radius is gone. That's also another safe way as well. For our next tip that we are going to cover is a very underrated tip, and that is learning about every killer to see what their strengths and weaknesses are. The best way to learn about each killer is just to straight up play every killer, or at least play killers that you struggle with. The reason why this is helpful is because you get to see what the killer sees, and you can kind of get to see what you would do in their situation as the killer. Not to mention, you get to see how every killer power works. I truly believe that this is the best way to learn each and every killer, is to just straight up play them. However, if you don't want to play killer, there is another way, but unfortunately it's not as good as just playing the killer, and that is just by watching a killer gameplay of high-ranked killers and kind of seeing what they are doing and what they're thinking. So I think this tip just kind of, at least in my opinion, is very underrated. I think it's a very great tool to use, and also, mind you, whenever you do use this tip, you don't have to get a 4K or anything like that. It's just a great way just to kind of see what each killer can do and what they're capable of. But let's go to tip number 4. The fourth tip that I want to cover is perks. Now, this is kind of a difficult topic to cover because there is no right or wrong answer whenever it comes to picking out your perk build. One thing that is important to think about whenever you are choosing your perks is knowing what type of survivor you are. So for example, I play very stealthy, so my perks are going to revolve around stealth and figuring out where the killer is at so I can focus on survival and doing generators. The perks I like to use are Spine Chill, Detective's Hunch, Kindred, and usually either Borrowed Time, or if I'm not using Borrowed Time, I like to use Will Make It. So at least I can be, a team player in the aspect of getting people off the hooks and doing stuff like that. But like I said, the most important thing is to figure out how you're going to play the game, because there is many different ways to play it. So just make sure you have, again, the perks that are going to help you survive, as well as help your team. But let's go to tip number 5. Our fifth tip is very important because of how common perks like NOED are. The fifth tip is breaking totems. This is one of those things that you will just learn the more that you play Dead by Daylight. One thing that I can say that is very important for you to know, especially if you are brand new to Dead by Daylight or you are just learning the games, is that totems are hidden very well, and all around they can be pretty hard to find. So for example, a map where it is pretty hard to find totems is the Gideon Meat Plant. Not only are there 2 different levels to the map, but there is a lot of corners and objects that can make them way harder to find. Now, there are more map examples, but I feel that's the biggest one where a lot of survivors have trouble. However, there are 2 perks that make finding totems on all maps way easier, and these 2 perks are Small Game, which gives you an audio cue when you are near a totem, and then the second perk that is going to help you is Detective's Hunch. Now, I use Detective's Hunch most of the time because not only does it show you the location of the totems, but it also shows you where chests and generators are within 32 meters for 10 seconds. I just wanted to cover how important breaking and finding totems are, especially with how common perks like NOED have become. But let's go to our sixth and final tip. Our sixth and final tip I'm going to be covering is stacking gens. Now, stacking gens is something you do not want to do if you can help it. This is something that you cannot completely control, unfortunately. So let's cover what stacking gens are. When gens are stacked, that means there is one gen left and the last 3 gens on the map are right next to one another. The reason this is bad is because you give the killer all of the power, because the killer really doesn't need to cover ground at all and the last 3 gens are right next to each other. So in turn, this makes the game much harder for you and your team. So let's cover an example of what I am talking about. So here in this screenshot, we have a generator in front of us. We've got one to our left, and then we've got one in the gas station ahead of us. If you notice, the gens are all in a perfect triangle. So now the killer is going to really have no problem stopping us at all from getting the last generator done. Now, if you guys remember, I said just a little bit ago that gen stacking is not always in your control. Yes, that is true, but you can help stop gen stacking by working on a generator inside or in the middle of the map, or you could work on a generator on the other side of the map. That's really the biggest issue. So typically speaking, when you are stacking gens, it's because a lot of people have done generators on the outside of the map instead of getting a couple done in the middle of the map, which unfortunately creates the gen stack, and it just, honestly, it just makes life a living hell sometimes whenever you are a survivor. But hopefully you guys enjoyed the guide. It was a blast. Let me know what you guys think about it, especially if you are brand new. Let me know if this helped you guys out. If you are brand new, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I'll catch you guys later.